All right, welcome back, Metalhead subscribers. Today we're going to be talking about some underrated metal. There's lots of bands that I grew up with that I assume are popular in the entire community, and there's some bands that I still don't see enough of. Talk to people on the street, concert t-shirts, Facebook posts, these type of things, where some bands I think are still underrated, so I'll be discussing those bands. Bands like Amorphous and Samael and Moonspell, for example, are popular and classic in my opinion. But here's a band called Sarcophago, where you might know it now, but I didn't know this band back when I was a teenager. So I want to point out Sarcophago INRI album from Brazil, 1987, and the band Sarcophago. I got some CDs in my collection here, like the Knights of Hell, the Laws of Scourge, the Rotting EP. Here's kind of a couple editions of INRI that I've got, and one of the most sick sounding live bootlegs is the Sex, Drinks, and Metal. If you can get your hands on that thing, it's just amazing. And then also from Brazil, since I was digging in that tote, the band Mystifier, another band that I think is underrated. Gosha album. My favorite from the band is The World Is So Good That He Who Made It Doesn't Live Here. And then their classic Wicca album. These two bands, Sarcophago and Mystifier, are to me now considered classic bands, but I think they're underrated because I just don't see other people worshiping them like we do with some notable bands. Moving on to Master's Hammer. This band is from Czechia and has been absolutely one of my top black metal of all time. Next to Sarcophago, second up, Master's Hammer, just a ruling band. I've got their album Feminist Occultist, I've got the Ritual album, and I've got this double digipack that's got the two albums put together. And then here's the band edition of Ritual. I've got a 3-disc set of their demos. I've got a live bootleg called The Mass and the Gymnosa Occulta. Don't speak Czech. And then honorable mention also from Czechia is this band Avenger. They've got a Live at the Open Hellfest 2003 album is really good. I like their Godless album. Fall of Devotion, Wrath, and Blasphemy is very, very good. And Shadows of the Damned is kick-ass. So also from Czechia, I just wanted to point out Avenger. If you haven't heard of Avenger, they're underrated and you should check into them. Next band that I think is kind of underrated, should be classic. They are classic, of course, but I just don't see enough of them posted, is the band Merciless from Sweden. I think this band rules their entire discography. They had a final reunion tour. They're now broken up. The latest album here, we've got the Unbound album like this on No Fashion Records, the Treasures Within on Active Records, and the Awakening debut album on Anti-Mosh, the Silence Productions. You might have these reissues, Treasures Within, the Awakening reissue, but I also have the bootleg called Realm of the Dark. I've got a bootleg that's Slava Fagersta in Sweden. And then another honorable mention from Sweden, since I was in that category, was the band Violation. 2 CDs from Violation and their awesome carbonized demo. Yeah, if you haven't heard Violation, check out Violation. Next underrated band, moving on, Necrophagia from Ohio, USA. Debut album, Season of the Dead. And what I have in my collection is their Cannibal Holocaust, which was a good EP. This is definitely a good purchase. Their Black Blood Vomitorium album. And then I've got their Holocausto de la Muerte, is a very, very good album. That's an excellent Necrophagia album and a good album. Their EP, Death is Fun. And then some of the earliest possible Necrophagia, Legacy of Horror, Gore, and Sickness, is this digipack. And some of this stuff goes way, way back. 1984, 1985. I mean, so Necrophagia may be the first death metal band of all time. It's another reason why they might be considered underrated. They were true death metal lyrics, great discography with several albums, and people keep talking about Death and Possessed all the time. Also, I want to mention, for honorable mention, is Brutality from Tampa, Florida. Brutality had a famous album called Screams of Anguish that I think a lot of people knew when it came out from Tampa. But you know, when they put out When the Sky Turned Black, it was a really good album. In Morning is a good album. And in more recent times, they had The Rise of Humans right here. That one's really good. And this album here, Sea of Ignorance, is I think one of their newest albums. It's the same vocalist all through the history of Brutality. And Brutality is a totally underrated band. Here is Metamorphosis demo and Demented demo on a CD. And I've also got this other same label called Brutality Archives Volume 1. I think there's a release with Brutality demos on it as well. But basically, you can't go wrong with Brutality. Their entire discography is great. I think Brutality is underrated. Another underrated band kind of mention is Morta Skuld from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Here's their debut Dying Remains album. The next one was As Humanity Fades, is an excellent old school death metal full length. For All Eternity is another classic underrated full length. I think a lot of people recognize that debut, but really 3 full-length albums in a row like this were all excellent from Morta Skuld. But that's not all, because Morta Skuld put out Surface album, and this first track on Surface, The Killing Machines from Morta Skuld, is one of the best death metal songs of all time. The Killing Machines from Morta Skuld. It's kick-ass. Next album they had was Serving Two Masters, and I've also got a compilation called Through the Eyes of Death. So by looking at all these different Morta Skuld albums, I'm thinking, gosh, this band is underrated. I mean, look at this discography. They put out several full lengths that were good, EPs. I've seen them live a couple times. Nice compilation album, really great artwork. Should go down in death metal history as one of the great death metal bands. So next underrated band is going to be Aggressor from France. This band had several full lengths too. Their earlier EP was called Satan's Sodomy. Look at this, it's a nice slimline EP. That is some really nice death thrash from France. And then probably their most notable album is Never Ending Destiny, debut album. And then they went on with this next album called Towards Beyond. And I also have a Symposium of Rebirth album. Look at that back cover there. Pretty neat stuff. So Aggressor, one of the best death thrash bands, and the band is from France. And then finally we're going to finish up with a band from Germany, this band called Bethlehem. This is in the black metal category, and I've got their album called Liebe dich Leer, their self-titled album. This album, which has got a different vocalist, their EP, Reflection auf Sterben, and then their Suicide album right here is one of the best, just great black metal stuff right there. The Dictius Te Nakara album looks like that. I think I have a couple versions of it, in fact. And this album will just rip your ears right off. And they start off kind of darker with this dark metal album, kind of a darker style. But Bethlehem has had kind of a turbulent career. They went back and forth between slow passages and kind of black. And some of the vocalists that they've chosen, at least 3 vocalists that I've known, have been some of the most incredible vocalists. Bethlehem is definitely an underrated band and should be in people's top 10 or top tier list always. So there you have it. Just a general discussion of bands that I think are underrated. There's tons of bands, of course, and I could mention all the bands in the world. Those are ones that I just kind of thought of off the bat that were just need to be mentioned. So put some comments this time. We'll see you next time.